Chase Thomas podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee. Everything School HQ over there, parts unknown, just ready for what is going to be a wild OV weekend here at the University of Tennessee. Ryan Callahan of GoVols247. Ryan, good morning, sir. How are you?
Doing well. How about you, Chase?
I'm doing pretty well. I mean, I'm feeling pretty good. I think Tennessee fans have been anxiously awaiting this weekend and next weekend because, Tennessee backloaded all their OVs for these last 2 weeks of June. And when they see that, like, Charles House spends some time somewhere else, and Shady Hayward spends some time somewhere else, and David Sanders spends some time, your fans you get nervous because you see all these guys that you've been reporting on for months and months who like the Vols, and they could still like the Vols, but OVs are fun, and OVs are something that could swing a lot of things. But Tennessee now officially gets their chance with a lot of big names over the next 2 weekends. How excited are you to see how this all unfolds for Tennessee?
Yeah, it's fun for fans, obviously, and like you said, anxious might be the best word. I think a lot of fans are kind of anxious about how this is going to turn out because of the way the last 2 weeks have gone. Some fans are already feeling like, oh, the momentum's slipping away. All these guys are trending elsewhere. But again, like you said, it's because Tennessee hasn't had its shot yet. So yeah, we often have, sort of an idea of where things are headed, but sometimes this time of year, it really is just pure chaos and you don't know exactly what's going to happen. So yeah, we're just as interested in how this is all going to play out this weekend and next weekend as anybody. I think those of us in the media, it's still enough of a mystery to us that yeah, we're intrigued by what's going to happen, and just like everybody else, waiting to see what all these guys have to say on Sunday.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think a lot of good folks are going to be locked into GoVols247 to see what Ryan Callahan and company. Look, Tennessee playing the College World Series tonight, but there's going to be a lot of eyeballs and Tennessee fans refreshing their Tennessee Twitter accounts to see what happens here. But something that I think part of the reason that Tennessee fans are going to be so preoccupied with Tennessee recruiting over the next 2 weekends is that you got to recruit from last weekend. You only had a couple OV officials headlined by Josh Petty, and we'll see how that one unfolds ultimately because Florida State still gets him on campus last. But you get Jayden Loftin, who I think kind of caught some Tennessee fans by surprise. So a lot of people did not know who that was before that OV. And then it's like, oh, he's a 4-star. Oh, he could be a strong side defensive end. Oh, is this our Tyree Weathersby from up north in this cycle? Is that kind of what you're gathering from what you've seen thus far, and how the staff sees Jayden Loftin as more of that strong side defensive end, or do you think he's another potential Leo? What did the Vols get in Jayden Loftin?
Yeah, I think a really nice player. I spoke with someone who saw him at an Under Armour camp in New Jersey last month and said, hey, look, he's a good player, and he's probably a little bit better than I thought before I saw him again at that camp. So I think this is a kind of a sneaky good pickup for Tennessee. I would agree that his future is probably at that 5 technique at the strong side defensive end position, just because he's grown so much this offseason. His coach was telling me the other day he was 210, 215 last season, and he's already up to 250, and he's put in that much work in the weight room, and his body just kind of naturally doing that. So I think it tells you a couple things. One, he's got the work ethic and the approach and mindset that this staff loves. I think he's a good culture fit in that way. And just a guy that's definitely not finished growing. You look at his frame; he's just a good sized kid that it doesn't take a lot of projecting to say this kid's going to end up 270, 275, and probably have his hand on the ground every down. So his coach was saying some schools that came through even said we think he might be a 3 technique, defensive tackle on the road. So we'll see how much bigger he gets, but it wouldn't take much continued growth for him to outgrow that Leo spot. So I think he could play both, but it just depends on what, how much bigger he gets by next year, how much he continues to try to grow. Or sometimes these guys, they get to a certain weight and they'll kind of put the brakes on themselves. I remember Derek Barnett, everyone in the world had him projected as a 3 technique years ago. He never got any bigger and actually got smaller, I think, from the time he arrived at Tennessee to the end of his college career. So you never know on things like that. But I would personally assume that the fact that Tennessee's already broached the topic of, hey, you could play some 5 technique too, that tells me they kind of had their sights set on playing him at that strong side defensive end position, at least in the future, if not right away.
And for reference, I think Caleb Herring he's up to like 250 now at Leo, right? But it took him to get to Tennessee where you have all these opportunities with food and diet and everything else and the strength training and like the facilities of an SEC school. Jayden Loftin hasn't played his senior year and he's at 250. So it's like there's just a lot of room for growth there. And I mean, when you look at past strong side defensive ends that Rodney Garner has pulled in here, Ryan, who does he remind you most of, like his frame right now when he was coming out of high school? Is it a Tyree Weathersby? Is it a Tyree West? Is it a Tyler Barron? Is it someone at the Leo spot? Who does he remind you the most of right now?
I think Weathersby is a good comparison because he at least in terms of build and skill set, he's a little bit taller, I think, than Weathersby maybe, but in that range, and that someone that you can easily project as a 5 technique, but just has a little bit of versatility. And you kind of didn't know what Tyree Weathersby was going to be either. I'm as fascinated as a lot of people to see what he looks like this fall because he's still someone that maybe in the future he grows to and can play multiple spots on the D line. We don't really know what to expect from him, but he's certainly one of those strong side ends right now. But yeah, I would kind of compare him to that just in terms of current weight and build and skill set a little bit. That's not a bad comparison. And he does still have a little bit of that Leo skill set too, where again, you can't rule that out that if he just wanted to stay around 250, he certainly could and still be in the mix there. But yeah, you look at most of those Leos, James Pierce, Caleb Herring, Josh Josephs, they were closer to 210 coming out of high school in most cases than they were 250. So that's usually what you're looking for at that Leo spot. You want those guys to be really athletic. James Pierce was probably 225 his senior year. You're not wanting someone too much heavier than 230 usually going into his senior season. So those guys that are 250, it doesn't take much projecting. And guys like Rodney Garner, they've seen this enough. They've seen guys come in at 250 and end up 290, 300 sometimes. I mean they're expecting, I'm sure, some growth in the future. So I think Weathersby is a good comparison, but you just don't know. He's sort of a blank canvas because he could end up staying close to where he is now, or he could end up 280, 285 in a few years.
Either way, it's a sneaky important need because I think you have a lot of rotation options at strong side defensive end. You got to stay healthy on that side, but Tennessee is so loaded up with Leos that you've kind of been like, okay, well, we kind of need to see what that other side is going to look like. There's talent, but you want to see someone break through, and you kind of want to add a little bit more depth on that side because you just look at just how many Leos Tennessee is going to be able to rotate this year and next year that you kind of need to address the other side. So I think Jayden Loftin, like you talked about, it's like I think is going to be a really sneaky important addition to this class. Something that I think has popped up a little bit more, and I think maybe Tennessee fans struggle to see here a little bit, and I want to get your perspective on this, Ryan, is that like it looks like there's going to be a lot more corners than safeties in this class, but I think you see corner and you just assume this is just going to be a ton of corners for Willie Martinez. But I think there's possibilities that these guys move around. Like Hayward, if he's in this class, he might be a linebacker. He might be a safety. Like who in this class that you think Tennessee is in play for or is currently has committed that is most likely to be able to make that move to safety because of just depth questions at Tennessee?
Yeah, I look at both Dylan Lewis and Tyler Redmond. To me, the two commitments. I think both of those guys have frames that, depending again, you just don't know how these guys are going to develop once they get into college. But Tyler Redmond, especially, he's a big framed kid,
yeah.
and look at him. I certainly wonder if he could grow into a safety or eventually kind of gravitate that way, depending on what Tennessee needs. But they've got some options there, and I think that's one of the reasons they can, like you said, focus a little bit more on the cornerback position in some ways. They've been trying to get 2 safeties in this class. They definitely want 2 safeties. And Sidney Walton obviously is one that projects as a safety, I think, right now. Shady Hayward, we'll see how things go there. I think that's clearly the remaining priority for Tennessee at the safety position. But one of the reasons you maybe don't see 5, 6 names on that board right now is they do have some options there if they needed to just sort of figure it out and bring in 5 or 6 total DBs, but not necessarily 2 surefire safeties. They've got some options there down the road, and also some guys on the current roster that they think, obviously Boo Carter's a star right now, but he could play safety in a pinch. So the numbers aren't bad there, and they've got enough versatility on the roster and in the current class that I think they would be okay. You alluded to Shady Hayward even potentially being a guy who could grow into linebacker. That's probably a down the road situation, but the fact that he is already, maybe a hair over 200 pounds does make you wonder what his future position will be. But I think he's an athletic enough guy that he could definitely stay at safety. I think some people maybe already have him in their minds penciled into linebacker in the future. I wouldn't assume that, but I do think that's a real possibility. So yeah, it's an interesting class from that standpoint, but they're still in on Timothy Merritt, the Miami commitment. They're still trying to get a second safety in this class. So I don't think people should assume that, Tyler Redmond or Dylan Lewis is destined for safety in the future because they might not get a second safety. They're still trying to get that second safety. We'll just kind of see where it ends up in a few weeks.
Is Merritt in this weekend or next weekend?
He's in this weekend, and that's a really interesting visit because he's 5 days removed from the Miami commitment. He's back in Knoxville, and that's not one that was a sure thing to happen this week. It was kind of off and on early in the week, so that's an interesting visit. One of many we're certainly watching closely this weekend.
Do you think they take, if Merritt wants in the boat and Hayward wants in the boat, do they take them both, or is this a one final spot here? What do you think they would do?
Well, they're not turning away Shady Hayward. I think it would depend on as with a lot of these things, we get a lot of questions. Would this guy be a take? Sometimes that's a spur of the moment decision a little bit, because you really have to decide kind of on the timing and how things are looking at that particular time. But with a guy like Hayward, he's not a guy Tennessee's going to turn away. So if Merritt for some reason wanted to flip this weekend, and you would think that's a situation that might take a little bit longer to play out since he did just commit to Miami last weekend. But if he did want in, that'd be an interesting dilemma for them. I don't think they want to pass on Shady Hayward by any stretch of the imagination. So at the same time, they like Timothy Merritt. So that'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. But I think, the goal's been 2 safeties. They're still focused on that, not looking to load up on that position. But yeah, that'd be an interesting dilemma. And I'm honestly not totally sure what they would do this weekend if that opportunity presented itself.
Interesting. Who do you think is the most important player for Tennessee to close with this weekend? If you had to, because we're going to get one. Like the fact that you got Jayden Loftin last week, like Tennessee's going to get one out of this weekend at the very least, probably multiples. But when you look at who's coming in, who do you think is the most important that Tennessee shows well and just really finishes this thing up? Because, I mean, it's commitment season. Who is the most important in this class?
Well, I will say, first of all, on the timing of all that, we'll see. But just because Tennessee got Jayden Loftin coming off that visit last weekend doesn't mean it's necessarily going to play out that way with this group. I think some of these guys already have their commitment dates or timelines in mind. So a lot of these guys might wait a couple weeks to make
this isn't a push it staff. This isn't like a Clemson or a Georgia. They're not gonna be like, oh, your spot, this is it. Like it's you're in the boat or sayonara.
And to your point, you do have to close either way, regardless of whether they're announcing in a couple weeks or next month or August. This is still an important visit. So I'd be lying if I didn't start with David Sanders, just because this is probably your last chance to get him on campus before he makes a decision. I mean, this is a big deal for Tennessee to potentially put itself in position to get this one across the finish line, because I think Tennessee has positioned itself that well with David Sanders that there's a real chance Tennessee lands him, and it's got to include an impressive weekend this weekend. He's in town with George McIntyre and Ethan Utley and guys like that already in Tennessee's class. Some other targets that he knows. He needs to come away from this weekend feeling the good vibes and feeling like, what, I need to be in Knoxville. And if Tennessee doesn't come out of this weekend thinking they're in the best shape with David Sanders, that would be concerning to me, because he still goes to Ohio State next weekend. He's still got potentially multiple weeks to weigh his options before making a decision. He went to Georgia last weekend. So I think you've got to start there. In terms of maybe the most pressing time-wise, it might be Charles House, the defensive lineman out of the Charlotte area as well, because he's been to Alabama and Georgia the past 2 weekends. After the Alabama visit, he said, hey, Alabama's the leader now, after Tennessee had been leading for a few months. And then after the Georgia visit last weekend, now it's Alabama and Georgia on top. There's a chance for Tennessee to swing the momentum back in its direction. I think they need to this weekend, because he's really important on the defensive line, where you got Jayden Loftin, you've got Ethan Utley, but you need multiple bodies at that position in this class with all that they're losing after this season. So I think Charles House is a pretty important one, and that's one that could potentially be an announcement within the next couple of weeks. He's looking to announce June 22nd potentially. So that's maybe the most urgent. This is his final visit before a possible announcement soon. So I think that one might be the most consequential in terms of an imminent announcement. But I think David Sanders is kind of the one you look to, because it's not every day you get a 5-star or have a chance to get a 5-star offensive tackle. It's a top 5 player in the class.
Absolutely. Who is Tennessee most in on this cycle that national folks and maybe fans are overlooking? Who's in because we hear you covering this program, you're like, hey, I know this program's sitting in the weeds for this guy, and it's not really. Who is the Tennessee version of that? Who is someone else writing on the other team's message boards of like, Tennessee's just lying in the weeds on this player that a lot of folks are overlooking, the Vols, or not giving the Vols enough credit for really having a real shot here?
That's a good question. I think there are a few that could fit that description. I think for a while it might have been it might have been Juan Gaston, the 4-star offensive tackle, teammate of Travis Smith. I think both of those guys, in some ways, Tennessee's chances have been underplayed by some media. I think especially with Travis Smith, Tennessee's right in the thick of that one with Georgia, and I think a lot of people have kind of pegged him for Georgia. And I think Georgia has felt really good about its chances of landing Travis Smith, and probably should as the home state school. But I think Tennessee's got a real shot in that one going into his official visit next weekend. Juan Gaston, though, is one where if you want to say laying in the weeds, I think some people think they're not even one of the top 2 or 3, and I think that's maybe underselling Tennessee's chances. He very well might end up at Georgia, and if I had to guess right now, they probably are the odds-on favorite. But he's talking about waiting till the fall to make a decision. I just don't know that that's the laydown that some people think it is, that he's just automatically going to Georgia. And if that's the case, Tennessee is one of the teams best positioned to have a chance to pull the upset. So that's one I'm watching this weekend. It's not a decision that's likely to come soon, but if Tennessee comes out of the weekend feeling pretty good about its chances of Juan Gaston, I think that's one that some people have maybe underplayed a little bit. So, but again, there are some other candidates that probably fit that description too. Those are just a couple that come to mind, and Gaston in particular going into this weekend, one that I've thought about here recently. But honestly, for a while it was David Sanders. I think some people thought Clemson, Ohio State had some buzz at one point, Georgia. I think for a while people were sleeping on Tennessee, and then it became apparent, I think, with the back-to-back visits in early April that, hey, Tennessee's really in this. And even now, I think some people maybe misrepresent the situation, thinking it's, hey, it's Ohio State, it's Georgia, Clemson's still in there. I think Tennessee is quite possibly the team to beat for David Sanders, and I don't think some people fully realize that they're in that good a position with him going into this weekend.
Are we going to get a crystal ball here soon, Ryan Callahan?
I don't know about this soon. We'll see, but I think that's at least something that could be on the horizon for this month. We'll see how the next couple weekends play out. I'm going to still watch that Ohio State visit next weekend probably before we do anything. But again, if you're Tennessee, I think you want to come out of this weekend feeling like you're definitely in the best position with David Sanders. So I think there's already been a good bit of optimism about him.
Well, you mentioned Travis Smith, and Tennessee obviously went into going into Georgia and pulling players Georgia covets is always going to be difficult. That's part of the big boy battles that I think Tennessee fans sometimes struggle with, is that look, it's just hard. Georgia's in a very talent rich state. I think either majority of most Tennessee classes are going to be Georgia kids. That's kind of where you want to be in terms of building this thing out and catching Georgia atop the conference. You kind of really need to have a strong footprint in the state of Georgia, and you go in and get Mike Matthews, my alma mater, Parkview last year. It can be done. And that was a big win for Tennessee. Travis Smith, what makes it interesting too is that Georgia, I don't know how many receivers they take in their class, and they're loading up quietly. And it's Travis Smith is right there. Tennessee wants one more. You got Radarious Jackson in there. You've got Joakim Dodson in there. You have an option with, how do you pronounce Miller's first name in Missouri?
He everybody calls him DJ, but I believe it's the Jerry in his first name. So yeah, DJ is what everyone calls him.
DeJerry Miller. When is he in? Is he in this weekend or next weekend?
He's in this weekend. And that's a really interesting visit too, because I don't think you can turn him away if you're Tennessee. You want Travis Smith, but that's a good enough player. I think a lot of people are maybe undervaluing him right now, at least Tennessee fans. I don't hear a lot of talk about him. I think that's a good player. If Tennessee ended up missing out on Travis Smith and getting DJ Miller, I don't think that's a travesty. I think DJ Miller's a good player.
And it's also just I guess because of the Missouri factor, I think you're always just kind of are you sure he's going to leave the state? Because of NIL stuff in Missouri, he's a St. Louis kid. Is that real?
Not taking an official visit to Missouri as of right now. It looks like an SEC battle for him. I think Ole Miss is probably Tennessee's main competition going into this weekend. He's also going to visit Kentucky next weekend. Illinois was supposed to be on his official visit itinerary. I don't know if he made it there for sure or not, but I haven't heard a lot of buzz about Illinois being one of the main contenders. So I think it's a Tennessee Ole Miss battle at the moment, and that's a really interesting visit. He was in this spring and really liked that visit as well. So he's a bigger guy. Tennessee's kind of compared him to at least to talking with him. They've compared him to Cedric Tillman a little bit. He's 6'3", 195. Runs pretty well though for a guy that size. I think he's a really good player that a lot of people are kind of sleeping on. So
is he done growing, or do you think he gets a little bit taller?
You never know for sure on that. I don't get the sense that he's likely to get taller, but with a frame like that, could Could it be 215 down the road, or is he going to stay closer to 200 pounds? That's always the interesting question with those bigger framed receivers. But and yet Travis Smith, for that matter, is a 190 pound guy with a good frame that could easily be that 200 plus pound guy too. So they've got a couple kind of bigger framed receivers that they're still in on for that potentially last spot in this class. But I'm kind of watching that DJ Miller visit this weekend, because that's a really interesting one to me, where if he wanted in, I think Tennessee ideally wants to see what happens with Travis Smith before it adds anybody else. But that's a good player that I think Tennessee would be hard pressed to turn away if that opportunity presented itself.
Your favorite commit in this class right now for Tennessee is who?
Oh man, I would probably go with. I feel like I'm going to forget somebody here if I just rattle off someone off the top of my head. I'd probably go with Radarious Jackson. I think a lot of people, based on his current rating, don't fully appreciate the upside and potential there that Radarious Jackson has. And if you haven't watched his film, it's a lot of fun to watch. He just nothing but big plays all the time. He can go up and get it in the end zone. He can make a catch and run for 70 yards. He's one of those guys that with the ball in his hands or just throwing it his way, he's going to make something happen a lot of times in high school games. And the most impressive thing to me might be he's just a football player who he's still figuring it out. I mean, he's still kind of learning receiver. He did some speed training this spring, working on doing some track, trying to work on his speed. He's learning how to get off the line and track. He just hasn't done a lot of this fine detailed training that a lot of receivers at his point in the development have done. He's got, I think, some real upside there that he could be, no matter who they add to this class for that last spot. I think he could end up being the best receiver in this class, because he's that talented already and just has some additional potential that people maybe don't realize. So I think that's one that, even though that was an in-state battle, people weren't even sure who finished second at the time. I think that was one that was a massive win for Tennessee. I think they believe they're getting one of the best receivers in the country, and I think they treated him that way. And I can see what they're impressed by. They would see him play basketball back in January, and the consensus was that coming out of that visit, Tennessee had the mindset of, we have to get this kid. He's that good. So I think he's potentially the star of this class that probably not enough people are talking about, because he's a really talented kid that I think is just starting to scratch the surface of what he could be.
I love it. Final thing, and I'll get you out of here, Ryan. It's kind of what I talked about at the beginning, and I'm curious from your perspective, covering recruiting for many years now. Do you think it'll end up paying off? And do you think this strategy of backloading OVs to the end of June is a wise one for Heupel and company?
I will say I think it's working out better this year than people maybe thought it would, because I think there was this concern that last year, hey, Cameron Fountain, you're in good shape with him, and he goes to USC, and next thing you know, he's off the board. And Sammy Brown commits to Clemson before he even gets to Georgia for his official visit with a school down the road from him. So there were all these sort of anecdotal examples of why Tennessee might not want to take the same approach this year, and yet it hasn't really played that out. Timothy Merritt would have been a big loss if he had not made the official visit to Knoxville, but there haven't been many of those guys that have come off the board before this weekend. So it looks like they're going to get most of these.
What do you think that is? Do you think there's something fundamentally different this cycle than last cycle? Is it the kids are just different? Is it just the way recruiting? Like, why do you think that is?
Yeah, and there weren't a lot that came off the board last year. There were just some, and there were enough that sort of got away from Tennessee. And Morris Williams, the defensive lineman, was another one that got away from Tennessee without an official visit. So there were a few examples just here and there that made it feel a little worse for Tennessee fans, I think. And this year you've only had one or two. Herbert Scroggins is one that canceled a visit to Tennessee, but that wasn't a guy a lot of people were talking about anyway. So this year it's turned out better. So I think as long as they get the vast majority of these visits, next weekend, like they have this weekend, I think that you would have to say it's played out as well as you could expect. And like you said, I think it sort of fits the personality of Tennessee's staff to play it this way too. They're not going to squeeze players and tell them commit now or your spot's potentially going to somebody else. They're just not going to take that approach. And they talk culture every step of the way. It sort of fits with that they're not going to rush players to make a decision before they're really ready. So I think they have to do it that way. And it's just it's going to be one of those things that's kind of a white knuckle ride for Tennessee fans year after year if that's how they continue to do it. But I think you kind of have to, because you don't want the first visit and then 3 more schools get to take their chance at swinging the momentum, and you've got to ride the whole roller coaster wondering if you survived all the way to the end. You'd rather get that visit the last weekend or the weekend before the last weekend and know that you're near the end. And if you build some momentum, it has a chance to get to whatever that player's commitment day is.
I feel like the only people it benefits to in the first is like Georgia, where you're just like, hey, you better get in now or that spot's gone. Like when you can operate from this unique position of supreme strength of you're just roster building, you're like, look, we're gonna have you take the other OVs 2 weeks later, but like we're gonna have someone to replace you by that. So like you better jump in now. So like I think it's not the personality of Tennessee right now, but I wonder if Tennessee continues to win more, continues to piece together better classes. I mean, Tennessee classes are good, but like if they are consistently moving into that 5 to 7 range potentially, like do they start moving it up because they're like, hey, look at what we're doing, look at what we're building. We're a perennial 10+ win team. We have a Heisman type quarterback. We're stacking 5-star quarterback after 5-star quarterback in these cycles. Like I wonder if that kind of changes because they operate more from a position of strength that like teams like Georgia and Nick Saban and Alabama in the past could just be like, look, it doesn't really matter when we have OVs with these kids. Like they know what they're walking into. Like, look, the deal is if you want to get in to this machine that we've got cooking, pushing kids to the NFL, then you better jump in now. So does that make sense? Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I could see that. Now, I still think it might be better strategy on Tennessee's part to maybe go toward the end, just because you'd rather have that late visit at least halfway through at the earliest. But yeah, I think that's something you could see a little bit more. But like you said, that is the key. The programs that we hear doing that are programs that feel they're coming at it from a position of power. Georgia's certainly one of them. Clemson, I think, felt that way. We'll see. I'll be interested in seeing how that works out this year. Do they have the same? Do they carry the same amount of weight they did a couple years ago with a lot of these kids? But that's why they've been coming at it from that way. They just say, hey, we're going to take all our official visits at the beginning, and if you want in, jump in now, and you better tell us. So it's an interesting approach. Not many schools take it. I don't see Tennessee changing its approach there, again, from the pressure standpoint. But yeah, as they get more sort of cachet in the recruiting world, maybe that's something they can at least attempt to have more of those early visitors, knowing that maybe you can weather the storm of 2 or 3 more visits.
Absolutely. Ryan, what can the good folks check out from you and the team over at GoVols247 this weekend?
Just a crazy amount of content. I can't imagine what our site is going to look like around this time on Sunday. It's going to be really interesting. But we've got obviously Tennessee got 26 official visitors in town this weekend. We'll have all that covered and much more. Obviously, keeping an eye on the visits happening at other schools too. Just every weekend's pretty wild this time of year, but this weekend is. I've not yet completely verified that it's the biggest official visit weekend in program history, but it very well might be. Because
how many is it total do we have in? What does it look like?
26 is the number for this weekend, and the total for each school each year used to be 56. So it would have been highly unusual to waste half of your official visit allotment for the year on one weekend. So yeah, I've had some people tell me they think this is the biggest total Tennessee's ever had. I haven't completely verified that, but it's at the very least one of the biggest official visit weekends in Tennessee history. So we will have all that covered for you on GoVols247. More visitors next weekend. Lots to check out, and certainly a great time to join the site and get all that coverage.
I love it. Go check it out today and this weekend. Ryan, keep up the great work, my friend, and we'll have to check in again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Chase.